Imagine a world where justice is a lie, where corrupt cops frame an innocent black woman, dragging her through a courtroom nightmare, lead to unleash a storm they never saw coming. This is corrupt cops frame a wrong black woman in court, and just made the last mistake of their lives a heart-pounding tale of betrayal, revenge, and redemption that will grip you from the first word. If you crave stories that expose raw truth and deliver jaw-dropping twists, hit that subscribe button now to join our community of thrill seekers and never miss a pulse-racing narrative like this one. Corrupt cops frame a wrong black woman in court and just made the last mistake of their lives. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that clings to your skin like damp fog. Aisha Thompson sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wooden table as if it could anchor her to reality. She was 32, a single mother, a nurse who worked double shifts at St. Mary's Hospital in Philadelphia, and a woman who had never so much as jaywalked in her life. Yet here she was, accused of orchestrating a drug trafficking ring that had flooded the city with fentanyl. The charges were absurd, laughable. But the faces of the jury, the prosecutor, and the two cops who'd arrested her told a different story. They looked at her like she was already guilty, like her dark skin and defiant posture were evidence enough. Aisha's lawyer, a weary public defender named Harold Grayson, scribbled notes beside her. But she could feel his doubt, his resignation. This was a setup, and she knew it. The question wasn't whether she'd been framed, it was why, and by whom. It started 6 months ago on a rainy April evening. Aisha had just finished a 16-hour shift, her scrub still smelling faintly of antiseptic, when she noticed a black SUV tailing her as she drove home. She thought little of it, at first maybe a neighbor, maybe a lost driver, but when it followed her through 3 turns, her stomach tightened. She pulled into her apartment complex, parked, and hurried to her door, glancing over her shoulder. The SUV idled across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like blank, unblinking eyes. She locked her door, checked on her 8-year-old daughter Naya, who was asleep with her stuffed giraffe, and tried to shake the unease. But it lingered, a shadow that grew darker over the weeks. The next incident came 2 weeks later. Aisha was leaving the hospital when 2 uniformed officers approached her in the parking lot. Officer Daniel Hargrove, a broad-shouldered man with a smirk that never reached his eyes, and Officer Maria Cortez, whose cold stare seemed to dissect Aisha before she even spoke. They claimed they'd received a tip about suspicious activity. In her car, Aisha, exhausted but polite, let them search her beat-up Honda Civic. They found nothing, of course. But Hargrove's parting words chilled her. "We'll be seeing you again, Ms. Thompson." She didn't sleep that night, replaying the encounter, wondering what she'd done to draw their attention. She was nobody, a nurse, a mom, a woman who kept her head down and her bills paid. But the cops kept coming. Over the next few months, Hargrove and Cortez became fixtures in her life. They'd show up at the hospital, asking her colleagues vague questions about her habits. They'd park outside her apartment, watching her come and go. Once, they pulled her over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. There. Flashlights sweeping her car like they were hunting for treasure. Aisha started documenting it, all dates. Times what they said because she knew something was wrong. She confided in her best friend Lena, a social worker who'd seen too many stories like this. "They're building a case," Lena warned. "Cops don't do this for no reason. You need to be careful." But Aisha didn't know what to be careful of. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't even a threat. Then came the night that changed everything. It was July, hot and sticky, and Aisha was home with Nia, helping her with math homework. The door crashed open, splintering wood, and 6 officers stormed in, guns drawn. Nia screamed, clinging to Aisha as Hargrove and Cortez led the charge. They claimed they had a warrant, but they didn't show it. They tore through her apartment, flipping cushions, emptying drawers. In her bedroom, Cortez found a plastic bag filled with white powder under the mattress. Aisha's heart stopped. She'd never seen it before, never touched drugs in her life. But the officers were already cuffing her, reading her rights in a monotone that sounded rehearsed. Nia sobbed, begging them to stop, but Hargrove just smirked. "Should have thought about your kid before you started dealing," he said. The evidence piled up impossibly fast. The powder tested positive for fentanyl. A search of her car turned up cash and $1,000 in crisp hundreds she'd never seen. A burner phone, allegedly hers, contained texts arranging drug deals. Witnesses, people Aisha had never met, claimed they'd bought from her. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Ellen Whitaker, painted Aisha as the mastermind of a sophisticated operation. A nurse who used her access to medical supplies to traffic drugs. The media ate it up, splashing her mugshot across local news. With headlines like "Nurse turned narco," Aisha's life unraveled. She lost her job, her savings went to legal fees, and Nia was sent to live with Aisha's estranged sister, Tanya, in Baltimore. Every night in her cell, Aisha lay awake, piecing together the puzzle. Hargrove and Cortez weren't just bad cops, they were orchestrating this. But why her? The trial was a circus. Whitaker presented the evidence with theatrical flair, while Grayson fumbled objections, clearly outmatched. The jury, mostly white and middle-aged, watched Aisha with suspicion. Hargrove and Cortez testified, their stories seamless, their faces unreadable. They claimed an anonymous tip had led them to Aisha, that her erratic behavior had raised red flags. Aisha wanted to scream. Erratic. She'd been terrified, harassed, targeted. But when she took the stand, her voice steady despite the fear, she saw the jury's eyes glaze over. Her truth sounded like desperation. Then came the first twist. On the fourth day of the trial, a man slipped into the courtroom sitting in the back row. He was unremarkable, mid-40s, graying hair, cheap suit, but Aisha noticed him because he didn't look at her. He watched Hargrove and Cortez, his expression unreadable but intense. She didn't know him, but something about his presence felt like a lifeline. That night, in her cell, she received a note, slipped through the bars, by a guard she didn't recognize. It read, "You're not alone. Keep fighting, Jay." She didn't know what it meant, but it was the first spark of hope she'd felt in months. The man, she later learned, was Jamal Carter, a private investigator with a reputation for taking on cases the system buried. Jamal had been hired by Lena, who'd scraped together every penny she had to fund him. Jamal was no saint. He'd done time himself for hacking in his youth, but he had a nose for corruption and a hatred for dirty cops. He'd been digging into Hargrove and Cortez for weeks, following a trail that led to a name, Victor Malone. Malone was a mid-level drug lord who operated out of Philly's underbelly. A man with enough money to buy silence and enough ambition to need scapegoats. Jamal's theory was simple. Hargrove and Cortez were on Malone's payroll, framing Aisha. To protect his real operation, Jamal's investigation uncovered a web of corruption that reached deeper than Aisha could have imagined. Hargrove and Cortez weren't just taking bribes, they were running a side hustle, planting evidence on innocent people to clear Malone's dealers. Aisha was their latest target, chosen because she was vulnerable, a black single mother with no connections, no power, and a job that made her an easy scapegoat for drug trafficking. But they'd underestimated her. Aisha wasn't just a victim, she was a fighter, and she had Jamal. The second twist came during the trial's final days. Jamal slipped Grayson a flash drive containing recordings phone calls between Hargrove, Cortez, and Malone, captured by a burner phone Jamal had planted in Malone's office. The calls were damning. Hargrove laughing about the nurse taking the fall. Cortez discussing how to split the cash from Malone. Grayson, suddenly energized, moved to introduce the evidence. The courtroom erupted. Whitaker objected, claiming the recordings were inadmissible, but the judge, a grizzled veteran named Margaret Holt, allowed them. The jury's faces shifted, doubt crept in. Aisha felt a surge of hope, but it was short-lived. That night, Jamal vanished. His apartment was trashed, his car gone. Lena called Aisha's cell, hysterical, saying she'd found blood on Jamal's floor. Aisha's world tilted. Had Malone gotten to him? Had Hargrove and Cortez? She didn't know, but the fear was paralyzing. The next day, Grayson told her the flash drive had disappeared from his office. No copies, no backups. The evidence was gone, and with it, Aisha's chance at freedom. The jury deliberated for 2 days and returned a guilty verdict. Aisha was sentenced to 20 years. As they led her away, Hargrove caught her eye and winked. She vowed in that moment that he'd pay. Prison was hell, but Aisha didn't break. She spent her days in the library, studying law, piecing together what she knew. She wrote letters to Lena, who was now raising Nia, urging her to keep digging. Lena, fueled by guilt and rage, tracked down Jamal's old contacts. One of them, a hacker named Riley, had a lead. Jamal wasn't dead. He'd been grabbed by Malone's men, tortured, but he'd escaped and was laying low in Jersey. Riley had a new set of recordings, better ones, with video showing Har,